Julian Burnside.
I suppose as the token lawyer I should start with defining what it is we're talking about. Censorship, it seems to me, can be taken globally as meaning any method by which members of the public are prevented from seeing a work of art or reading a work of art, as the case may be. So it doesn't matter whether it's done by the Office of Film and Literature Censorship or whether it's done by bringing public pressure to bear on a gallery or an individual artist, or whether it's done by threatening or actually bringing charges of pornography or related charges. Each of these methods is calculated to prevent work from being seen and is therefore properly thought of as censorship. The debate about the Henson exhibition has really run on two parallel tracks. On one track has been the notion we must protect children from exploitation, and no one could argue against that. On the other track, artistic freedom is important, and not many people have argued against that, although some might wonder whether a case that supports the notion of privileging the arts has ever actually been articulated. I want to deal with those two parts. The question of protection. Well, who is being protected and from what are they being protected? And I'm now addressing the range of censorship generally. The who is being protected is either the public at large or perhaps an individual within the public, and that's probably been the real case in the recent debate. The concern has been for the individual children who were the subject of some of the photographs. The interesting thing about it is that, everything that Hetty has said is in a sense, or at least most of what she said, is in a sense unarguably right. You can't dispute the motherhood statements that she makes. The real problem is drawing any connection at all between the motherhood statements on the one hand and the Bill Henson exhibition on the other hand. What is the connection between them? She has not put forward a single fact to suggest that the children who were photographed suffered any harm at all. Furthermore, she fails entirely to put forward a view that the children didn't consent, and if she wants to raise the question, well, could they validly consent? The fact is their parents consented as well, and as a matter of law, the age at which a person can consent to various things moves progressively from their birth through to their attaining their majority, according to their development, their intelligence, and the nature of the thing to which they're asked to consent. So, an infant can't consent to an injection. An injection without consent would be an assault, but the parents can properly consent on the child's behalf to the infant getting an injection. When the child is 8 or 10 years old, the child might be able to give or withhold consent to an injection. And likewise for more sophisticated medical procedures, progressively as they approach their majority, children gain the capacity, the legal capacity, to consent to more and more things until, as adults, they can consent to or withhold consent for anything that might otherwise violate their rights. There is no suggestion whatever that the children who were photographed by Bill Henson suffered any harm at all. But for this, by making the issue so public, by making the core of the argument for protection the proposition that there is something repulsive, offensive, or indecent about the naked adolescent body, that may harm children. Because we all know one of the deep truths which Bill's work shows is it reminds us of the terrors of adolescence. The transition from childhood to adulthood is a terrifying time during which our bodies rebel and betray us, during which childhood certainties are all overturned, and during those few years of transition, we really do not know who we are or where we're going. Our bodies in particular are a source of embarrassment when we are adolescent, at least all but the luckiest. And I cannot think of anything more damaging than to have it said publicly that your body, neutrally naked, is itself a thing that gives offence to the public. If there's been any harm caused in this last 3 weeks, it has been caused by those who make the argument that Hetty Johnson has run. So what are we being protected from? Well, generally speaking, if you look at the history of censorship, there are two forms of harm from which we're being protected. First, ideological harm, and second, moral harm. In the realm of ideological harm, you will find it, generally speaking, political or blasphemy is the subject matter. Political censorship is not so popular these days. It was flourishing in Australia in the 1920s. It popped up its head again in 1998 when Rabelais wanted to publish an article called A Guide to Shoplifting, which no doubt was going to be a very useful addition to the La Trobe University students' education. It was banned by the censors on the grounds that it was encouraging criminal activity, and in fact, on any neutral reading of it, if you read it in the law reports, that's exactly what it did. I think that's about as close as we've come to real political censorship in recent times. Blasphemy is a different matter. Blasphemy has an interesting history, which we don't have time to go into, but blasphemy emerged as an offence in England during the reign of Henry VIII. Why? Because Henry VIII had declared himself the head of the breakaway Church of England. And there are cases in the 16th century which say that an attack on the church is an attack on the state. And so it was, in a sense, a branch of political censorship. The most recent attempt in Australia to use the law of blasphemy against a work of art was the Piss Christ case, in which I had the pleasure of acting on behalf of the National Gallery of Victoria. Then Archbishop George Pell decided that what was outwardly a very lyrical, not terribly interesting photograph of a crucifix surrounded by golden liquid was backlit and soft focus, was blasphemous. He could not have maintained the argument unless he knew the title, which was Piss Christ. The attempt to prevent the exhibition from being shown failed, but sadly, as Ian pointed out, the exhibition was cancelled voluntarily by Timothy Potts, who I hereafter thought of as Piss Potts. The other branch of harm, and this is really where you get all the interest in censorship, is protecting us from moral harm. Few people remember that Chloe, that iconic painting that hangs in Young and Jackson's, was removed from public viewing in 1880. That in the 1960s, radio commentator Ernie Sigley was banished from Melbourne radio stations because he used the word pregnant on the air. That in 1973, the presenters of a play called The Boys in the Band were prosecuted for obscenity because one of the lines in the play was, "Who do you have to fuck to get a drink around here?" It's surprising to see how the landscape has changed since then. In 1975 and again in 1998, for good measure, the film Salo was banned. And in my research of the Serrano case, I came across a fascinating case which tests something about our values. You know, censorship and issues of censorship like this always come about at the places where the tectonic plates of our values collide. And you test where the moral values of the society are by the way the decisions go. I hope we're not heading back towards a bonfire of the vanities, but I fear sometimes.